Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome back to the modding of Isaac with Lyte. And today we're going to work on a boss variant and custom boss pools. Now I'm going to give you the bad news first. This boss variant isn't a brand new boss. It doesn't change the boss portrait. It doesn't have its own room. Because every time I try to modify the special room's STB file, it crashes whenever I start a run. So, at the moment, no totally new bosses in their own room. It's not great, but I will be showing you how to interact with their AI and how to create a pool for them after the fight is over. So let's get started. Take a look at how all this works. Given we're fighting bosses, I'm giving myself a little bit of an advantage at the start of each run. A bit of an advantage. We don't want to fight Dingle. The Haunt is good. Hey look, it's the Haunt. We've got Death Touch, Abaddon, Magic Mush. Haunt's gonna be no... It's Dungle! That's right, Dungle replaces several of the regular bosses by exploding out of their chest. And he's a nice, rich, dark brown, so you know he's not a regular Dingle. And you also know he isn't a regular Dingle because he relentlessly chases you for the entire fight. That's all he does. He doesn't want to do anything else. Thankfully, we've got Abaddon, which instills fear in him, and well, now he's dead, and gave us the flush. We've got, there's options, so we also got a second item to show you that it only replaces the first item. Now, if you don't believe me, we can do another fight. Yeah, Ragman's fine. Ooh, it's a little dark in here. Hey, look, Dungle's back. Yeah, Blackheart's helped to speed this fight up tremendously. And there we go. Now it's how to jump, because Dungle's item pool isn't just a single item. It's a weighted pool of how to jump, the flush, and magic mush. Figure you should get rewarded for fighting such a tough little bugger. But that's basically what it is, how it works. We're doing the bait and switch thing for both. Both Dungle and Dungle's item, it puts down a thing and we replace it. Because we can't make the rooms that have Dungle in them, and spawning the post-fight items is also a little bit out of our control, but we can always swap them out. So let's head over to the code, see how it's working. And we've got nice peaceful music this time. I like it. So, actually, let's open up the mod itself. Dungle. So in the mod itself, we've got content, we've got entities too, because Dungle is an entity, you set him up as such. In resources, GFX, we've got Dungle's NM2 file, and then under bosses, we've got the sprite. Now, this is just a simple palette swap that we've done before. If you open up the sprite sheet, it's just Dingle with a slightly different color. I didn't do any serious changes to the NM2 file either. I just swapped out the sprite sheet. Because this episode is not about making a fancy new boss, it's about manipulating the way the boss works. So there isn't anything too surprising in any of these. The entities 2, version 5 as per usual, and we made a custom entity like we have before. You take something similar to what you want, in this case, Dungle. We took Dingle. Then you set the variant. We're currently hard-coding variants, unfortunately, but it is what it is. So our entity variant, random number, pretty large. In working with the room editor, it looks like it doesn't enjoy entity variants larger than 65535. It might be able to handle them, but it runs into some issues when trying to assign them, so for the moment, I'm going to recommend numbers lower than 65535. Then you set the base HP, the stage HP. It is in fact a boss. The boss ID is for when eventually we can set up the boss portraits. The boss portraits are keyed to this ID number, as are the rooms in the room editor. It's still unclear how then you might even be able to make those rooms appear on a particular floor. Who knows how that happens? It seems to be all in the shadows. Hopefully, we'll be able to modify this someday. Cannot be a champion. Collision damage is 1. He hits you for just half a heart. Mass, radius, friction, all these we've seen before with other things. And then eventually we'll cover the bestiary stuff, but for now, the NM2 path is the most important. It's how Dungle looks. The name is pretty important. So NM2 path, name, and variant. Yeah, those are the really important parts. We've done this before, but in case this is the first variant video you're looking at, you need the ID to match Dingle because it's a Dingle variant. You grab the variant of Dingle, use the NM2 path. Using the Dingle ID gets you Dingle's AI, such that you can mess with it without having to rewrite the AI from scratch. So that's entities2.xml. That's all there is to it. Now over to the code. Regular boilerplate. Setup register mod. We're going to use the game variable. So we set local game equals game with the parentheses, just such so we don't have to write quite so much. This Dingle counter, we don't actually use. That was an early idea on how this would be done. It isn't necessary. So we set up some things regarding Dungle in general. So we also don't need pool updated. That was another thing from an earlier version. Yeah, not necessary. So the only things we actually need are the chance of spawning said Dungle. Right now, 100% chance. Whenever you initialize any of the enemies of the type we set, 100% chance they will explode into a Dungle. We set as variant, using get entity variant by name, Dungle. We set the delay. How long will it take before the enemy explodes into Dungle? You can make it variable, you can make it constant. I like it being constant. And then current, you notice, isn't capitalized. Like, it's not all caps, so it is not a constant. Actually, this should be nil. It was originally false in a previous version. Since we got rid of pool updated, we get rid of this comma. These are always comma separated list, thing, comma, thing, no comma at the end. And then we have the current room. So that's the room that our code thinks you're in. It's currently nil. The current stage, where our code thinks you are, is also nil. Those will be important later. Here, we set up Dungle's item pool. So we have Dungle pool, and we pass it a dice. A die. I don't like writing die in my code, so I use dice. And you can roll it multiple times, so it could be several dice. But either way, this is an RNG object that we're going to send to this pool, such that we can take the dice and get a random integer, 1 to 100, as our roll. If our roll is less than 50, so half the time, it returns how to jump. If it's greater than 50, greater than or equal to 50, but also less than 85, then you get the flush. If it's greater than or equal to 85, you get magic mush. So it has a slope of probability such that half the time you get how to jump, and then, what is that, 35% of the time you get flush, which means 15% of the time you get magic mush. All this does is return which thing to spawn. The actual spawning happens somewhere else entirely. But this nice little helper function makes it such that you don't need to know what Dungle's pool is down when you do the spawning. You can just set it up top, and you're good to go. we're going to work from the top all the way down. It seems like a good order this time. On update, we've got first frame things where I give the various items and trigger the Emperor card. Now this part has something a little interesting to it because you have to do a little bit of extra shenanigans. You can't just say, get frame count equals 1, use the Emperor card. Because when you use the Emperor card, it stops time, but keeps updating. So you'll keep using the Emperor card over and over and over and over and over again, but never actually reach your destination. So you have to add an extra little check to see whether or not you've attempted to teleport. Ugh. It's not great, but it gets the job done. And this could be done using a global like this. You could set it on the player. You could use all sorts of variables, but you need something that keeps track of whether or not it needs to do it. And then here, we set it back to false. So in the first instance of the first frame, you use the stuff. And then in the second frame, you set it back such that you can teleport again when you hold R. So first frame, do this once, no matter how long that first frame lasts. And then second on out, you set it to false such that you can use this ability again. Next up, we grab the level. We ask the level for the current room index and compare it to what we think the current room is. And we ask the level for the current stage and compare it to what we currently think the stage is. This is slightly better than the previous end of room code that I've used because it's possible to leave a boss room and end up in a room with the same index. And it might not cancel out the effects. It's no good. So we check the room and we check the stage. And if either of them isn't the same, then we trigger the change of room. And when we change room, we set the current dungle to nothing. So if you fight a dungle in a room, then you leave the room, there's no dungle anymore. Poof. It doesn't affect you anymore. Then you set the current room to be the current room and the current stage to be the current stage. This should work in the vast majority of cases. I haven't tested it in every case because there are a lot of cases to test. But if you want anything that triggers on the end of a room or the beginning of a new room, this should get it done for you. You just change dungle.current to whatever you want it to do, whether it's removing effects or anything really, adding effects, who knows? This is when you change the room. And that's in a post P effect update. So you get the player when you do P effect updates. Yeah, so moving right along. Sorry about the sniffles. Tis the season. So next up, we've got an MC NPC update callback. Now, I've set a lot of these callbacks because I wanted to run on all of these different enemies. So Dingles, Monsters, Haunts, Famines, Duke of Flies, Little Horn, Ragman, and Widow. Anytime you encounter one, they have a chance of exploding into a dungle. And so anytime they exist, this callback will be run, and it'll come right in here, on Dingle. And it's a little odd that you would treat all of those like a dingle, but it does work. So we start off by getting the dingle data. Dingle::get data. This is the table that holds your personal updates to their information. It gets attached to them as an entity, and it'll show up anywhere it goes. So we get that dingle data. If your dingle's variant is 0, now it might not be a dingle. It might be a Ragman variant 0. It might be a Haunt variant 0. So this will only affect base, like just basic versions, but it will affect the different colors. Variants and colors are different things, but I haven't been able to modify the colors yet. That could be fun. So our entity variant is 0. It is an active enemy that is not dead. We came across this in working with the dips and dots. Dead enemies still exist for at least a little while. Okay? And the dingle init is nil. So we have not initialized this entity. So we've not initialized it yet. So what we do is we initialize it to false. That's the default. Don't explode into a dingle. We grab ourselves a die, just a nice little random thing, and then we set the seed of that die. So seed the randomness. You want this to happen the same way each time. You don't want someone to do a seeded run and one person gets the haunt and the other one gets dungle. Which seed do you use? Well, oh, we do use dingle counter. I forgot. Local dungle counter equals 0. So we do use dungle counter. I forgot what it was used for. Let's actually spell it right. Okay, there we go. Dungle counter equals 0. Here we use the dungle counter as the offset for our seeded randomness. So we create a die, we set the seed to be the room's spawn seed. So whenever you get into a particular room, it should have the same spawn seed every time in the same run. And then we set the offset to be the dungle counter for how many times we've tried to spawn the dungles. This could change in the course of a run, such that things could be a little bit different. So I don't know 100% whether or not this is a good plan, but I wanted to show you that you can set the seed and then the offset. Because otherwise, if you set no offset, you'll get the same result every time you're in a room with that seed. The room spawn seeds are not quite as random as we might want. So to add a little extra randomness, you add an offset in there to go further down in the list of pseudo-random numbers. I know some of this might be over your head, but if you just take some time, experience the randomness, see how it ends up actually working, play around with it, you'll get used to seed versus offset. And then we roll the die. Roll the die to 100. If it is, in fact, less than dungle chance, then we set the initialization to true, saying you should be a dungle. Again, this chance was set up top, and you can change that such that it spawns as much as you would expect. Because having every one of those turn into a dungle is a bit ridiculous. But 10% chance? 20% chance? Seems pretty good. But for showing it off, you should probably go with 100. So that says that a dungle should be spawned. But it doesn't happen right away. So then it continues down. If the dungle data.init is true, so it's saying you should spawn a dungle, and the current entity's frame count is greater than or equal to dungle.delay. I say greater than or equal to because sometimes games are weird and it might try to skip the frame you want. So if it's at any point in the future, then you make them explode. So current entity's frame count is greater than the delay, kaboom, and we get a dungle. So Isaac.explode at the current entity's position. The second parameter would be what caused the explosion, and then the damage of the explosion. So you don't want to be too close to these things when they go up. Does a whole heart of damage. And then we do the bait and switch. We spawn a dingle with our dungle variant, no subtype, at the dingle's position with the dingle's velocity, and then nothing really spawned it. And I keep saying dingle, even though this could be a haunt, it could be a ragman, it could be anything. It's the entity that gets sent into on dingle. So once we have spawned our dungle, we set our dungle's initialization to false. We don't want our dungle to explode into a new dungle. You're never going to win. and then we remove our regular old entity. So the haunt goes away. Poof, in an explosion. So that's the initialization after a delay. Now comes the fun part, making him run. So if our dingle variant is our dongle variant, so the thing we're looking at is in fact a dongle. Ooh. But it's not entirely accurate, is it? Because it's possible, unlikely, but possible, that we could have gotten one of these guys. We could have gotten a famine with our dongle variant. So here, it's probably best to also include dingle.type equals entity type dot entity dingle. Because you want to be certain that it is in fact a dongle and not something vaguely dongle adjacent. So we've got the type, dingle, the variant, dongle. Then, if the dingle state is not equal to 4, then you set the state equal to 4. That 4 is the dingle charge. 11 is the prep for the charge, and there are several other numbers that represent the other states a dingle can be in. This is where you manipulate the AI. You look at the current state and decide, how long do I want to stay in that state? And where do I want to go after I'm done with that? You can add your own custom states and your own custom animations on top of the existing AI. But that's an episode for another day. I'm just letting you know that if you want to experiment with entity AIs, so enemies and bosses, you look at the state, you see how long it's been there, and you transition into the other states as necessary. I'll show you how to look into that in a second. And then after we've set the AI, we say if the current dongle is nil, so it thinks there isn't a dongle, then we set that to the current drop RNG. Because if you remember, we use this this dongle current for, oh right, you haven't seen what we use it for. But up here with the dongle pool, where we give it RNG, this is where we grab that RNG from. We choose the current dongle's drop RNG as the RNG for our drop. Shocking. So that's setting the AI, that's setting up the RNG, doing the bait and switch for the dongle itself, and doing the initialization, such that you know whether or not it should be a dongle. Now we're coming down here to a callback that I don't use very often in these episodes, the MC post render callback. But there are a couple of situations in which it's really quite useful. One is doing visual bait and switches, and the other is for debugging to the screen. So I'm going to remove these comments such that the next time we run it, we can actually see that. I'm also going to comment out the custom AI, such that when we go back into the game at the end of this episode, we'll see the different states that a dingle can be in. But here in post render, this is where we do the item bait and switch. So we grab the level, get level, we get the current room's type. And if it is a boss room, so level, get current room, get type equals room type, room boss. So it's a boss room, and dongle.current is not nil. So there has been a dongle in the current boss room. You go through each of the room entities, and if it's a pickup of variant collectible, you swap it out. So we spawn a pickup of type collectible with subtype from our dongle pool. So we take the RNG item, or object. One second. So we take the RNG object that we put into dongle.current and hand it to the dongle pool, rolls some dice, gives us back an item. At the position of the current item, Velocity of the current item should be 0, but make no guarantees. And then what spawns it? Nothing. We then set dongle.current to nil, such that we only do it once. Then we remove the existing object, and then this break kicks us out of this loop. Whenever you're going partway through a loop and you're like, oh, I'm done, you break out of it and you end up down underneath. It's a very handy thing to have when you only want to do something once. And so this does a bait and switch on just one item from our dongle pool. So we're going to save this. We're going to hope we didn't screw anything up too badly, and then head back into our game. So what we're going to do is we're going to luamod dongle, and then we're going to restart. Widow should explode into a dongle. And now we have dongle state 3, which is idle. 10, about to fire, 8 firing, 3 waiting, 11, 4. We know 4 is charged, we know 11 is wait, and then 16 is out of breath. 3 is idle, 11 is starting to charge, 4 is charging, and eventually he'll go to 16, which is breathing hard. And so you can do this for pretty much any entity. You can start logging their states to the screen so you can understand the way they do what they do. And then eventually you'll be able to modify that to make them act the way you want instead of the way they want. And there we go. We got how to jump once again. That's all for this episode. I will see you in the next episode of the Modding of Isaac with Lyte.